Welcome to the Sleep Science channel. I'm glad you found your way here. Maybe tonight your body feels ready to rest, but something inside still stirs, a soft undercurrent of thought, sensation, or awareness. Not loud, not dramatic, just persistent. That quiet resistance to stillness. It's something many people feel, though it's rarely talked about in clear terms. A kind of restlessness that doesn't come from energy, but from somewhere deeper. As if the soul itself is pacing even when everything else has stopped moving. That's what this video is about. The science of a restless soul, not in a poetic or abstract way, but in a calm, curious exploration of why it happens. Why some minds don't settle easily, why the body may slow down while the inner world keeps turning. We'll take our time with it. There's no need to keep track or follow closely. The pacing is slow, the voice is steady, and the screen stays quiet on purpose to reduce stimulation and allow your own rhythm to unfold naturally. If you find yourself returning here again, you're welcome to subscribe, but there's no pressure. This space is here whenever you need it. And now we begin, not with a conclusion, but with an opening. A gentle unfolding of what it might mean to feel restless without knowing why, and what the brain and body may be trying to tell us when sleep doesn't arrive right away. Restlessness is a word we often associate with movement, shifting in bed, tapping fingers, pacing rooms. But beneath the surface, it can take a much quieter form. A kind of internal vibration that doesn't always show itself, yet never fully disappears. It may appear as a thought that loops back on itself, a feeling that doesn't have a name, a sense that something is missing, or that something is waiting, though we're not sure what. This inner hum, this tension without direction, is not unusual. In fact, it may be part of what it means to be human. It's not always a signal of stress or trauma or anxiety, though it can be. Sometimes it's simply a sign that the nervous system is still alert, still processing, still holding on to subtle cues from the day or from far longer ago. In the language of the body, rest and readiness are not opposites. They exist side by side, especially in modern lives where stimulation never fully stops. The brain learns patterns through repetition. And if it has learned to stay active, to stay prepared, to stay tuned in to potential needs or shifts in the environment, it may not quiet down just because the room is dark. Even when you are safe, even when nothing is demanded of you, that readiness can remain. And that's not failure, it's function. It is believed that the brain's default mode network, a system active when we are not focused on the outside world, continues to fire in loops, reviewing, projecting, remembering, imagining. These are not faults of the mind. They are features, useful ones in many contexts. But when we are trying to fall asleep, they can feel like interference, as if the mind is not cooperating, as if it refuses to turn off. But it's not refusing. It's continuing until it feels it can pause. There is something gentle in that realization. That restlessness may not be defiance, but diligence. That the soul's inability to rest easily is not a flaw, but a reflection of inner activity that has not yet come to stillness. The nervous system operates through balance between sympathetic arousal and parasympathetic recovery. These aren't simply switches, but sliding scales. And depending on the experiences we've lived, the roles we carry, the environments we've adapted to, that balance may take time to shift. The state of alertness lingers, not always for dramatic reasons. Sometimes just because the day was full, or because the mind is still searching for closure, or because the body hasn't yet received the cues it needs to soften fully. Observations suggest that the mind's relationship with stillness is complex. We may long for it, but not always trust it. Stillness invites presence, and presence can bring up what we've been avoiding. Thoughts, memories, unprocessed moments, even subtle discomforts. In motion, we often don't feel them, but in quiet, they return. This can lead to restlessness that seems unexplained but isn't. It's simply what arises when the background becomes foreground, when silence has room to speak. And again, this doesn't mean something is wrong. It may simply mean something is being noticed, at last, with space and no distraction. Sleep researchers have noted that the transition to sleep is one of the most vulnerable states we enter. Not in a fearful way, but in a neurological sense. The brain shifts from active engagement to passive observation, from processing external cues to drifting into internally generated imagery and sensation. This is a threshold, and the nervous system doesn't cross it immediately. It checks, it waits, it rechecks, and this can feel like hesitation, like resistance, but really it's a gradual unfolding, a protective one. It's only when enough signals align, darkness, stillness, cooling body temperature, lowered stimulation, that the mind begins to release its grip. But for some people, especially those with more sensitive internal systems, or a tendency to reflect deeply, that threshold may take longer. The soul stays restless, not because it doesn't want to sleep, but because it hasn't yet felt the internal permission to stop. It hasn't been convinced that now is a good time to let go. And so it holds on, gently, repeating thoughts, playing back images, reassessing feelings, sometimes all at once, not loudly, just steadily, as if it's trying to complete a cycle that never quite ends. Even in the quietest environments, the mind may wander, and that too is normal. Restlessness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's slow and circular, a mental pacing through the same corridors of thought, again and again. This pattern can be shaped by many things: our habits, our history, even our hormones. For instance, certain stress chemicals take time to metabolize even after the stressor is gone. The body may still be experiencing the echo of something that the conscious mind has already moved on from. And until that echo fades, the system remains slightly elevated, just enough to delay sleep. Over time, if this becomes familiar, the brain may start to expect it, to plan for it. And so even on calm nights, the pattern returns. Not because the body is in distress, but because the body has learned to stay ready, to stay aware. And that awareness, though subtle, is enough to hold the soul in motion, even when everything around it has stopped. This is not failure. It's adaptation. A system doing what it believes is best, based on previous experience. And because it's adaptive, it can change. Not instantly, but slowly, gently, through repetition in the other direction, through moments of quiet that do not require alertness, through safe spaces where nothing must be solved, where the body is allowed to soften without needing to perform, where the soul is not asked to be productive or insightful or even responsive. Just present. This kind of space can help the system begin to shift, not by force, but by familiarity. The more often the nervous system enters a truly non-demanding environment, the more it learns that stillness is not a threat, that silence does not require preparation, that nothing bad happens when we do nothing. But it takes time. especially for those whose restlessness has been shaped over many years, or who carry responsibilities that do not end when the lights go out. Even in sleep, the mind may feel responsible for others, for outcomes, for remembering, preparing, watching, and so it stays slightly awake, just in case. Not out of fear, but out of care. This too is part of the science of a restless soul, the ways in which responsibility becomes internalized, the way care for others translates into self-monitoring, the way we remain alert, not because we're unwilling to sleep, but because we want to be ready if needed. And the truth is, the body is very good at readiness. It knows how to listen, how to stay aware of subtle cues, and it will let go when it senses that those cues are no longer active. But sometimes that sensing takes a while, especially if the signals are unclear, if the environment is quiet, but the thoughts are not, if the world is still, but the inner dialogue continues. The brain in those cases may stay in a kind of low-level vigilance, not distress, just awareness. And in that awareness, sleep comes more slowly. This isn't a defect, it's a rhythm, one that may look different for different people. Some fall asleep quickly, others take time. Some need silence, others need gentle sound or low light, or a familiar presence. The pathways to rest are not identical. They are shaped by personal experience, physical makeup, and environmental context. The idea that rest should come easily and instantly is more cultural than biological. In reality, sleep is a threshold we approach, not a switch we flip. And a restless soul is simply one that takes a longer path, not a broken one, just a different one. A path shaped by thoughtfulness, by care, by subtlety. A path that may not look peaceful on the surface, but which holds its own kind of depth. And in time, even that path can soften. The system can learn that nothing more is needed, that now there is nowhere to be, that even the thoughts can pause, not because they were forced to, but because they were heard, not because they were wrong, but because they have said enough for now. A restless soul is not in opposition to rest. It is simply a soul that has learned to move carefully, to stay alert until the signals are clear. And when those signals arrive, not in instruction, but in atmosphere, something inside begins to shift, slowly, gently, without needing to be told. And perhaps that's where we'll remain for now, exploring these quiet inner motions, not trying to stop them, just watching, not trying to resolve, just understanding. The sensation of being unsettled, even in calm surroundings, often begins without clear cause. There may be no major stressor, no significant event, and yet the body feels like it is waiting for something to finish, or begin, or change. This quiet tension is not always visible to others and not always noticeable even to ourselves until we attempt to rest. It hides in the gaps between activities, in the transition spaces where there is nothing to focus on. And once everything becomes still, it begins to rise, as though stillness itself reveals something we didn't notice in motion. This phenomenon is common among people who spend their days in a high state of responsiveness. Those who are frequently responsible for others, or who move between tasks without space in between, may find that their nervous systems stay activated even long after the doing has stopped. The rhythm doesn't change just because the clock says it's time to rest. It is believed that much of this is connected to the way the brain learns to interpret cues. If a person regularly receives stimulation, notifications, messages, conversations, interruptions, the brain begins to expect those inputs. And when they stop, That silence can feel unfamiliar, even slightly threatening. Not in a fearful way, but in a way that suggests the system is unsure. Is it over? Should I still be listening? Should I be ready to respond again? This uncertainty can keep the system active, not intensely, but just enough to keep sleep out of reach. And when this happens night after night, it becomes familiar. The body begins to associate stillness with the start of internal activity, rather than its end. Restlessness can also be tied to how we process emotions. Feelings that were postponed during the day because there wasn't time or space or privacy can return in the quiet hours. The nervous system, finally unoccupied by external demands, may open space for what had been held back. And this release, while necessary, can feel like restlessness. Thoughts without shape, sensations without origin, a mild ache in the chest, a weight in the stomach, an urge to do something even though there's nothing that needs doing. These are ways in which the body digests experience, not with logic, but with presence. And that digestion takes time. In studies of sleep onset, it has been observed that even when the body is physically still, the brain may remain active in default mode for quite a while. That activity includes memory consolidation, emotional integration, and pattern recognition. These are not distractions. They are part of the brain's nightly work, but they can feel like distractions, especially when we expect the mind to become quiet just because the light is off. The truth is, the mind may need to finish what it started earlier. It may need to review a conversation, replay a moment, imagine a different outcome, or simply wander through scenes that left an imprint. Not as a form of rumination, but as a form of closure. And until that closure is reached, the system may not allow full rest. This is where compassion becomes important. Not as a feeling, but as a posture, a way of approaching ourselves with less urgency and more curiosity. If the soul is restless, it may not be because something is wrong, but because something is unfinished, or unspoken, or misunderstood. And often the simple act of noticing that restlessness, naming it gently without needing to fix it, can begin to create space. The space that allows signals of safety to return. The signals that tell the body you are no longer needed in alert mode. You can soften now. Even if sleep doesn't arrive immediately, that softening begins to shift the pattern. Just a little, but enough. For those who feel this pattern deeply, it helps to understand that the body is not working against you. It is working for you. Every restless moment is a sign that the system is responsive, sensitive, tuned in. That can be tiring, yes, but it is also a strength. The same qualities that make someone thoughtful, perceptive, and empathic are often the ones that make sleep more elusive. Because the brain doesn't drop things easily. It carries, it considers, it compares, it checks. These are functions that serve us well in many situations. But at night, when we wish to let go, they may feel like weight, and yet they are part of us. They don't disappear on command. They dissolve with time. And understanding that can reduce the friction. Instead of wrestling with restlessness, we begin to rest beside it. This gradual shift can also be felt in the body. The nervous system may stay slightly engaged, even when muscles are relaxed. Breathing may be soft, but not yet deep. Heart rate may be calm, but not yet slow. This is the intermediate state, the place between full wakefulness and sleep. Some call it the liminal zone, a space where nothing is required, but not everything has stopped. In this space, restlessness can feel more noticeable because there is no distraction. But this is also where softening can begin, where the brain starts to drift, not because it was forced to, but because nothing new is being demanded of it. That absence of demand is a key part of the process. We live in a time where stimulation is constant. Bright screens, fast content, short attention spans. These shape the way our brains function. They create patterns of quick switching, fast scanning, immediate evaluation. And while this helps us adapt to information-rich environments, it makes stillness harder to access. Not impossible, just unfamiliar. The brain may treat stillness like a gap that needs to be filled, and so it fills it with thoughts, memories, ideas, comparisons. Not because it wants to, but because it's trying to help. It believes there is always something to process, and until it learns that stillness can be complete without more input, it will keep offering more. This is why slow content, calm voices, steady pacing, low stimulation can be helpful, not as a trick, but as a signal, a way of telling the brain, this space is different. Nothing new is coming. You can stop scanning, you can stop preparing, you can let go. And the more often the brain receives that signal, the more it learns. Not in a dramatic way, just through repetition. Through exposure to quiet that is not interrupted, through presence that asks nothing in return. A restless soul does not need to be stilled by force. It needs to be accompanied until it softens. That accompaniment can take many forms: sound, sensation, rhythm, atmosphere. What matters is not the specific tool, but the message it carries. You are safe here. You are allowed to rest. Even if you don't fall asleep yet, even if your thoughts continue. That permission alone begins to change the pattern, not instantly, but gently, over time. In some traditions, restlessness was seen not as a flaw, but as a form of vitality, a sign that the person was engaged with life, emotionally attuned, spiritually open. That doesn't mean it was always easy, but it was respected. And sometimes just knowing that your inner movement is a form of depth, not dysfunction, can shift the tone. The goal is not silence at all costs. The goal is ease, the ability to be with yourself without pressure, the ability to feel what is present without needing to resolve it. And when that ease arrives, even in small amounts, the system begins to settle. Not in response to command, but in response to atmosphere. The sleep process is not only physical, it is relational, it is shaped by how we relate to ourselves, to the day we just lived, to the thoughts we carry, and the relationship can shift with attention. If we approach the night as a place where we must perform, must sleep, must stop thinking, must clear the mind, we create tension. But if we approach it as a space where nothing is expected, where wandering is allowed, where thoughts can come and go without consequence, we remove pressure. And when pressure is removed, the system begins to change. That change is often imperceptible at first. A slightly longer pause between thoughts, a feeling of distance between stimulus and reaction, a moment where nothing new arises and nothing needs to. These are signs of softening, and they are enough, more than enough. In fact, they are the beginnings of rest, even for a restless soul. Many people carry restlessness without knowing it. It becomes part of their background state, so woven into daily experience that it feels normal. The mind becomes accustomed to constant low-level motion, to scanning, to reviewing, to organizing the day into stories that make sense. But restlessness is not the same as anxiety. It does not always feel sharp or distressing. Sometimes it feels like a gentle hum, an internal motor that never quite shuts off, a sense that something could happen at any moment and the body should be ready just in case. This readiness can come from many places. For some, it began in childhood. For others, it came later, through periods of uncertainty, responsibility, or emotional demand. It becomes a kind of default position, a way of staying prepared. And when that preparation is no longer needed, the system doesn't always know right away. The nervous system does not operate on logic. It operates on signals and experience. If it has been trained to expect interruption, it will stay alert. If it has learned that quiet is temporary, it will remain cautious. And even if the current moment is completely safe, that learned vigilance doesn't disappear just because we wish it to. It softens slowly through exposure to new patterns. This is the science of nervous system plasticity, the way our inner responses can gradually change over time, not through effort, but through repetition. And it is believed that one of the most powerful tools in that process is not action, but atmosphere. The consistent presence of calm, of safety, of non-demanding spaces begins to create contrast. And contrast is what helps the system notice what's different. It begins to recognize that it does not always need to be on alert. Still, restlessness does not always signal unresolved trauma or psychological distress. In many cases, it reflects a rich internal world. People who think deeply, feel intensely, or reflect often are more likely to experience restlessness at night. Not because something is wrong, but because the brain is used to complexity. It does not quiet easily because it is accustomed to wandering, to building connections, to imagining alternatives. And that capacity, while beautiful, can also make stillness feel incomplete, as though something should be happening, as though stillness is missing something rather than being whole in itself. This too is a learned perception, and it too can shift. With time, the brain can learn to experience stillness, not as absence, but as presence. Not as something lacking, but as something full. A fullness of space, of quiet, of safety. This kind of learning is not fast, it's subtle, but it is powerful. It happens in moments like this, when nothing is being asked of you and yet you are here. Listening, not performing, not fixing, just observing. And the more often the nervous system enters this kind of space, the more it understands that rest does not require vigilance, that thoughts can arise without needing action, that awareness can remain without needing to solve. And that realization, when it comes, begins to change the structure of restlessness itself. There is also a biological rhythm at play. The body operates on cycles of wakefulness, alertness, digestion, restoration, and those cycles are not always synchronized with the demands of the clock. Sometimes the body wants rest, but the mind is still in motion. Sometimes the mind feels tired, but the body holds energy. These mismatches are common. They are not errors, they are fluctuations. And in those moments of mismatch, restlessness can appear. Not as a flaw, but as a reflection of desynchrony. It may pass within minutes, or it may linger for hours, but either way, it is part of the rhythm. And if we stop resisting it, if we allow it to move as it needs, it often resolves more quickly than if we try to control it. This is one of the paradoxes of rest. The more we try to force it, the further it moves away, and the more we allow it, the more it begins to arrive on its own. The nervous system responds to pressure with activation, even subtle pressure, even the thought, "I should be asleep by now," can activate stress pathways. because should is a demand, and the body listens to demands with readiness. But if there is no demand, no goal, no timeline, no pressure, the system begins to unwind. Not because we made it, but because we stopped asking it to perform. Some researchers have explored the idea that sleep, especially the early phases of sleep, is less about turning off and more about tuning differently. The brain begins to shift from external focus to internal association. It lets go of narrative structure and allows images to drift freely. This is not a passive state, it's just a softer one. And people with restless minds may find that this drift takes longer to begin, not because they resist it, but because they are still carrying the momentum of focused thought. That momentum, like a spinning wheel, cannot stop suddenly. It slows, it glides, it fades gradually. And restlessness is often the space between momentum and stillness. In that space, the mind may try to re-engage, to look for something to do, to assess whether sleep is coming fast enough. These are habits, not choices. And when we notice them gently without judgment, we create a different experience. We allow those thoughts to pass without feeding them. We watch the restlessness without trying to hold it. And over time, that watching becomes restful in itself. Not because the mind is quiet, but because we are no longer caught inside its loops. We are next to them instead, and from that position, sleep begins to feel more accessible. There's also a connection between imagination and restlessness. People with vivid inner worlds may find that night opens a door to wandering thought. With no external input, the mind begins to create its own. It constructs scenes, dialogues, memories, and possibilities. And while this can be beautiful, it can also delay rest. Because the brain is active, it's not shutting down, it's exploring, it's building, it's expressing. And so the soul feels restless, not because it's disturbed, but because it's alive. Because there is more to process than the day allowed. And now in the quiet, it finally has space. This kind of internal richness is often misunderstood. It doesn't fit into narrow definitions of rest or wellness, but it is real. And it is valuable. The goal is not to silence it, but to befriend it, to let it move without interference, to let it slow in its own time. And when it slows, it does not disappear. It becomes softer, quieter, like waves after a storm, still present, but no longer crashing, just rising and falling, predictable, soothing, familiar. And this is where rest begins to become possible, not through control, but through companionship. Not by shutting down the mind, but by staying with it gently until it no longer needs to move. A restless soul is not an enemy of rest. It is simply a soul that needs more time, more space, more quiet understanding before it can settle. And that need is not a weakness. It is a signal. One that says, I am still here. I am still listening. I am still responding to everything I've carried. And I will rest when I am ready, no sooner, no later, just in time. Some people describe their restlessness not as a feeling, but as a background state, not overwhelming, not urgent, but always present, like a gentle static behind the quiet. They may not even notice it until silence sets in, until the tasks are done, the lights are off, and there is nothing else to do. And suddenly, the stillness feels unfamiliar. It's not frightening, it's just different. The absence of distraction reveals the presence of something else. An internal movement, slow and formless, like a tide that never stops flowing beneath the surface. This kind of restlessness often lives in the nervous system's baseline, It's not triggered by danger. It doesn't arise from crisis. It's simply the result of having adapted to constant input. People who spend much of their time caring for others, solving problems, thinking ahead, or managing multiple roles tend to stay in a low-level state of readiness. The system learns to anticipate, to prepare, to respond. And when the environment goes quiet, the system doesn't immediately understand that its job is done. It may keep scanning, not because it's on edge, but because it's learned that vigilance is useful. And in many ways it has been. These patterns often come from a place of strength, from being attentive, dependable, alert to nuance. But those same strengths can make it harder to transition into rest, because the mind doesn't turn off easily. It listens for what it might have missed. It revisits earlier conversations. It rehearses tomorrow's possibilities. And though none of this is loud, it creates a gentle resistance to stillness, not a refusal, just a delay, as if the mind is saying, just a little longer, just until everything is settled. But everything is rarely settled, and that's part of the challenge. The world rarely gives us a clear signal that now everything is complete, that now there is truly nothing left. So the mind keeps looking. And when it finds nothing to do, it sometimes invents something, it replays, it questions, it imagines. Not because it wants to disrupt rest, but because that's what it knows. Motion, reflection, readiness. Understanding this can help shift how we relate to restlessness. It is not always a signal of a problem. Often, it's a reflection of a system that has been asked to do a lot and that hasn't yet been shown that it can stop. The task, then, is not to shut it down, but to stay with it, to offer an environment where no new input is coming, where nothing will be demanded, where the pace is slow and the tone is soft and the signals are consistent. Over time, those signals begin to register. The nervous system, noticing the absence of urgency, begins to lower its baseline, and the restlessness, which was never trying to cause harm, begins to fade. This process is subtle. It cannot be rushed. The more we try to make the body sleep, the more we activate the very systems that prevent it. Sleep arrives not through force, but through surrender. And surrender is difficult for a system that has been trained to stay in control, especially when that control has been necessary. For some, restlessness comes from having to hold too much for too long, from being the one who remembers, who organizes, who anticipates. These roles are not easy to put down. They do not stop just because the day has ended. In those cases, it may help to see sleep not as a goal, but as a permission to stop holding, to stop anticipating, to be without performing. This is not a mental command. It's a shift in relationship, a way of saying to the self, there is nothing more to do. You are allowed to be unneeded for now. That message, repeated gently night after night, begins to change the body's expectations, and eventually, restfulness replaces restlessness. Not because something was defeated, but because something was no longer required. There is also a cultural dimension to restlessness. In many environments, stillness is undervalued, productivity is rewarded, motion is celebrated, and idleness is viewed with suspicion. These messages shape how we feel when we do nothing. Some people find that rest activates guilt, or that stillness brings up a sense of uselessness. These responses are not inherent, they are learned, and they can be unlearned. But unlearning takes time. It begins with noticing, with becoming aware of the feelings that arise when we stop, and instead of pushing them away, we stay with them. We observe, we allow, and over time they shift. The soul, too, can carry habits. Not just the mind, not just the body, but the deeper self, the part that listens beneath the noise, can learn patterns of vigilance, of service, of scanning for what's needed. And if that part of us has learned to stay awake, it may resist sleep, not as a protest, but as a gesture of care, as if to say, I will keep watch, I will stay here just in case. This is a tender kind of restlessness, not dramatic, not loud, just faithful, just present. But even this can soften if we offer it reassurance, if we say, not with words but with atmosphere, that nothing is needed now, that it is safe to rest, that someone else is watching, that nothing will be missed. The brain, when it feels safe, begins to shift into slower frequencies. The nervous system lowers its tone, the heart rate softens, the breath lengthens. These changes do not happen all at once. They unfold gradually like dusk turning into night. And in that unfolding, rest arrives. Not because we forced it, but because we allowed it. Even the most restless soul can learn stillness. Not through silence alone, but through kindness, through consistency, through slow, quiet companionship with the parts of ourselves that don't yet know how to stop. These parts do not need to be silenced. They need to be heard. And once heard, they often become quiet on their own. So if restlessness is here tonight, let it be here. Let it move as it wishes. Let it say what it needs. You are not its enemy. You are its witness. And in your quiet company, it may begin to change. Not by force, not on a schedule, just slowly, gently, in its own way. There is a kind of honesty in restlessness. It reveals what the surface might conceal. Even when the day seems ordinary, even when nothing obvious feels unresolved, the presence of restlessness can suggest that something within us is still unsettled. Not in a dramatic way, not always in a way that asks for attention, but gently, persistently, like an unfinished sentence the mind keeps returning to, hoping to find the right words, the right pause, the right conclusion. It may not be a problem to solve. It may simply be a process continuing in the background, emotional, cognitive, or physiological, a process that hasn't yet run its full course. Often what keeps us from rest is not the presence of thought, but the shape of it. Some thoughts are light, like passing clouds. Others return again and again, looping with no clear direction. These loops can be comforting, even when they are distracting. They provide structure in the quiet, but they also create motion. The brain, encountering familiar patterns, begins to trace them automatically. It isn't trying to keep you awake. It's doing what it has learned to do, follow threads until they feel complete. And if those threads never reach a natural stopping point, the brain may continue spinning. That's why repetition is such a powerful force in the sleep process. When the mind is offered predictable patterns, gentle sound, soft pacing, a steady rhythm, it begins to shift from active search to passive absorption. It stops reaching and begins receiving. And in that transition, rest becomes more accessible. Not because the thoughts are gone, but because they are no longer the center of attention. They move to the periphery where they can fade. This is similar to how the body reacts to familiar environments. When a space feels safe, known, and unchanging, the body stops scanning for change. It stops bracing. It begins to release tension it didn't realize it was holding. And in that release, rest begins. The same is true internally. When the mental environment is familiar, consistent, and non-threatening, the mind stops its search. It stops pushing for answers. It no longer feels the need to keep cycling through options or memories or predictions. Still, some forms of restlessness resist even this. They come not from thought, but from sensation. A twitch of the leg, a tension in the jaw, a fluttering behind the eyes. These are not imagined. They are part of the body's communication, signals from the autonomic nervous system, residual energy that hasn't yet dispersed. Sometimes it helps to acknowledge them without reacting, to simply say inwardly, "Yes, I feel that," and then let the feeling exist without trying to change it. That too is a form of rest, being with what is without resistance. Over time, this approach changes the body's response. It learns that sensation does not always require action, that discomfort does not always signal danger, and that rest can include motion, if that motion is allowed rather than fought. This shift can be subtle, but it's important, because so often restlessness grows when we resist it. When we try to shut it down, it becomes louder. When we try to override it, it pushes back. But when we turn toward it with curiosity, its edges soften, its urgency fades. It begins to move differently, less like something to escape, more like something to accompany. In some ways, restlessness is a form of attention. The brain is attending to something, even if we don't know what. Even if the object of attention is vague, or internal, or symbolic, the soul may be lingering over a moment that didn't get its full attention earlier, or holding space for something that hasn't yet been acknowledged. These internal movements don't respond well to force, but they do respond to time, to space, to the quiet presence of awareness that does not judge and does not rush. This presence is a kind of medicine, one that requires no effort and yet offers a powerful shift, because it creates a context where rest is not a task, but a side effect, where stillness is not a demand, but a natural settling. And in that context, restlessness is allowed to complete its course, like a bird circling before it lands, like a ripple that fades when the water is undisturbed. And so even now, if your mind is moving, if your thoughts are active, if your body still holds small signals of motion, it's okay. You're not doing it wrong. There is no wrong here. There is only what is. And the longer you stay with what is, the more likely it is to change. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but organically, in its own rhythm, just as it formed. The science of sleep has shown us that this rhythm is deeply personal. Some people fall asleep in minutes, others take longer. Some minds quiet quickly. Others need to process a few final loops before they let go. And this variation is normal. It is not a diagnosis, it is a shape. Your shape, the way your system moves toward rest. And it's worth noting that rest is not always the same as sleep. We can be in a state of deep rest while still awake. The brain can downshift even without losing consciousness. Breathing can slow. Muscles can loosen. Thought can become less sharp, less structured. This is not failure. This is not falling short of sleep. This is rest in its own right. And sometimes this kind of rest is exactly what the system needs before sleep arrives. So if sleep is not here yet, that's all right. Restlessness may still be present. Thoughts may still come and go. The body may still send its small signals. And that is part of the process, not a barrier to it. The goal is not to eliminate restlessness. The goal is to be with it long enough that it begins to shift on its own. And it will. Not always quickly, but reliably. Because all systems, when given the right conditions, move toward balance. They seek it naturally, not through effort, but through opportunity. This is the opportunity, a space with no demands, no tasks, no judgments, just steady words, a soft voice, a background of calm. Here, restlessness is not a problem, it's just a signal. And signals fade when they are received, when they are heard, when nothing more is asked of them. That's where we are now. In the space after the asking, in the stillness after the sound. And that sometimes is enough. In the quiet moments before sleep, awareness often shifts. The mind begins to notice what it had ignored. Sounds in the distance, the weight of the blanket, the faint rhythm of breath. None of these are new, but they feel new because attention has changed direction. It has turned inward, no longer anchored to the demands of the day. And in that turning, restlessness may emerge more clearly. Not because it has grown, but because the noise around it has faded. The contrast sharpens. What was once hidden by activity now stands in relief against the silence. This shift is part of the natural sleep cycle. It's a movement from external orientation to internal reflection, from interaction with the world to processing within the self. For many people, this transition is smooth, but for others, it stirs things: memory, emotion, tension, thought. The inward space becomes crowded, and that crowding makes rest harder to access. The mind moves from thought to thought, not in urgency, but in persistence. It checks. It rechecks. It asks questions that have no immediate answers. And in doing so, it delays the descent into sleep. There is nothing wrong with this pattern. It is a reflection of complexity. The human mind is not designed to shut off like a machine. It is designed to continue softly, quietly, even when we are not aware of it. That continuation is part of what makes us who we are. But at night when we seek rest, that same feature can feel like a flaw. We want quiet. And instead we find motion. We want stillness. And instead we find loops. But these loops are not mistakes. They are the echoes of a day that hasn't quite ended. The final flickers of thoughts that haven't fully dimmed. Some people try to control this, to stop thinking, to force quiet. But control activates the mind even more. It signals that something must be done. That effort is needed. And effort is the opposite of rest. Instead, it can be more helpful to observe the mind without engaging it, to let the thoughts come and go like shadows on a wall, to treat them not as obstacles, but as movement passing through. They do not need to be solved. They do not need to be followed. They only need space to exist and then space to fade. This process resembles how the body handles energy. After exertion, the body doesn't stop instantly. It cools, it stretches, it adjusts. The nervous system lowers its tone gradually, and the same is true for the mind. It cannot go from alert to asleep in a single step. It needs time to adjust, to let go of the structure of the day, to release its grip on control. This time is not wasted. It is essential. It is part of how the mind resets. Restlessness, in this context, is not an interruption. It is part of the adjustment, a signal that the system is still shifting, that the rhythm of waking life is still slowing down. And just as a spinning top does not stop suddenly, neither does the thinking mind. It turns, it slows, it leans, and eventually it comes to rest. But only when it is allowed to, when the environment signals safety, when the internal pressure lessens, when nothing new is expected, and most of all, when the restlessness itself is no longer seen as a problem, because that shift in perception changes everything. It moves us from resistance to allowance, from judgment to curiosity, from effort to ease. This ease is what makes rest possible. Not silence alone, not stillness alone, but ease. A state in which the body is not asked to perform, the mind is not asked to deliver, and the soul is not asked to explain itself. In that ease, restlessness has nowhere to go, no task to complete. It begins to dissolve, not because it was pushed out, but because it is no longer needed. And sometimes this ease comes through simple repetition. Through the same voice, the same pace, the same lack of urgency, the nervous system begins to recognize the pattern. It sees that nothing is changing, that nothing new is arriving. And in that recognition, it lets go. That's what this space offers. A rhythm that doesn't accelerate, a tone that doesn't demand, a content that doesn't build toward a conclusion. This constancy is not designed to entertain. It's designed to settle, to create the kind of background that allows foregrounds to fade. The kind of environment where motion slows, not through discipline, but through disuse. Because when nothing is fed, the fire dims. When no attention is given, the movement stops. Not in defeat, but in completion. This is not always obvious. The mind may still flicker, the thoughts may still appear, but they arrive with less intensity. They float instead of press. They drift instead of circle. And even if they remain, they do so more quietly, less insistently, like background music fading into silence. This is the slow unwinding of restlessness. It does not happen at once. It does not follow a straight line. It happens in spirals, in gentle loops, in pauses that become longer, in thoughts that become softer, in awareness that no longer pulls toward meaning. Eventually, even restlessness rests, not because it has resolved itself, but because it no longer needs to. It has been heard, it has been seen, and in that witnessing, it is freed from its cycle. It no longer needs to repeat. It can let go, and so can you. Some describe their restlessness as a weight. Not heavy, not overwhelming, but noticeable, like something that presses just enough to prevent full relaxation. It isn't sharp, it doesn't demand attention, but it is there, quietly making rest more distant. Others experience it as a kind of energy, light, buzzing, unfocused, a readiness without a target. Both are common, both are valid, and both reflect the same underlying truth. The body and mind are not yet done, not yet convinced that it's time to let go. This conviction doesn't come from logic, it comes from signals. Signals that the environment is safe, that the demands are over, that no further processing is required. And these signals are not always clear. If the day ended abruptly, or if it carried unresolved tension, the system might not have received the message. It may still be holding on, just in case, waiting for a final word, a final action, a sign that it's okay to rest. Without that, the nervous system stays slightly elevated, and sleep, though desired, remains at a distance. In sleep research, this in-between state is sometimes referred to as sleep onset latency, the time it takes to fall asleep after lying down. But behind the term is a much more nuanced experience. This latency is not empty. It's full of sensation, thought, adjustment. The body cools. The muscles settle. The brain waves begin to slow, and yet during this time, many people become aware of just how much motion remains inside them. They feel it more precisely because they're trying to rest. Stillness reveals activity. Quiet makes the inner noise louder, and the desire for sleep can sharpen the awareness of not sleeping. This creates a feedback loop. Wanting rest makes the lack of rest more noticeable. The noticing creates tension. The tension delays sleep. And so the cycle continues, but it doesn't have to. There is another way, a way that doesn't try to interrupt the loop, but gently steps beside it, observing it without judgment, noticing it without needing to change it. And in that shift of posture from effort to observation, the loop begins to loosen. The system begins to ease, and rest becomes more accessible. This is the path of least resistance. Not because it is passive, but because it flows with what is already happening. If restlessness is present, let it be present. If the mind is moving, let it move. If the body is twitching, let it twitch. None of these are threats. None of them are enemies of sleep. They are simply phases, movements, transitions, and they will pass when they are ready. The mistake we often make is assuming that rest must be perfect to be real, that the mind must be silent, that the body must be still, that sleep must come quickly. But these are ideals, not necessities. In truth, rest can include motion, it can include thought, it can include imperfection. What matters is not the absence of activity, but the absence of resistance to that activity. When resistance fades, rest begins, even in the presence of movement. Some people find it helpful to remember that sleep is not a destination. It is not a place we go, it is a state we enter. And states are not binary. They are gradual, layered, blended. The boundary between waking and sleeping is porous. One moment you are here, the next you are elsewhere. And you rarely notice the crossing. You just find yourself on the other side. Restlessness can feel like a barrier to that crossing. But often it's just a sign that you haven't reached the edge yet, that the mind is still in motion, that the body is still preparing. It doesn't mean you won't get there. It just means you're not there now. And that's okay. There is no failure in slowness. There is no wrong pace. There is only the rhythm of your system. And that rhythm is valid. In fact, many cultures once saw the transition to sleep as a kind of journey, a liminal space between worlds, a crossing that couldn't be rushed. In that view, restlessness was not a problem. It was a part of the process, a sign that the journey had begun. And when we adopt that mindset, when we stop expecting instant change and start allowing gradual unfolding, we reduce the tension, we create space. And space is what rest needs most. You don't need to feel calm to become calm. You don't need to be silent to move towards silence. You only need to be here, to notice, to stay. The mind may still wander, the body may still move, but your presence, the act of staying with what is, begins to change the pattern, slowly, quietly, without pressure. And in time, that presence becomes enough. Enough to settle the loops, enough to quiet the resistance, enough to turn restlessness into rhythm, into breath, into rest. It is often said that rest is the absence of disturbance. But in practice, it is more often the presence of permission. Permission to feel unsettled. Permission to remain unfinished. Permission to let things be incomplete for now. Rest does not always require resolution. In fact, the insistence on resolving everything before sleep can become its own kind of barrier. The body might be ready, the room might be quiet, but the mind, still negotiating with its unfinished thoughts, stays active. Not out of rebellion, but out of habit, out of care, out of the belief that something must be done before rest is deserved. But rest is not earned. It is allowed. And it does not wait for perfection. The nervous system does not require all conditions to be ideal before it begins to soften. It only needs consistency, the absence of new demands, the presence of familiar signals, a voice, a rhythm, a space that does not change. These things tell the system that vigilance is not needed, that it is safe to pause. And when that message is received, even without words, the shift begins. Still, the transition into rest often begins with discomfort. Not physical necessarily, but psychological. A vague unease, an impatience, a questioning of whether it will work tonight, whether sleep will come, whether the mind will cooperate. These thoughts are common, they're part of the landscape, and they too can be observed without engagement. Left alone, they pass more easily than we think. Fed with attention, they grow, but simply noticed, they dissolve. They do not need to be argued with. They do not need to be answered. They only need to be seen and left to fade. There is something powerful in that kind of attention. Attention without control, awareness without demand. This is a restful posture, one that tells the mind, you are safe even now. Even if you are still thinking, even if you are still moving, you are not behind, you are not doing it wrong, you are simply arriving, slowly, on your own time. Some people carry restlessness as a remnant of earlier seasons, times when vigilance was necessary, when stillness was unsafe, when quiet moments were interrupted or uncertain. The body remembers those things, even long after the circumstances have changed. The nervous system learns patterns through repetition, and unlearning those patterns is not about forgetting. It's about offering a new experience again and again, calm that stays calm, silence that remains uninterrupted, stillness that asks nothing. Over time, these become the new signals, and rest, once unfamiliar, begins to feel possible again. But for that to happen, there must be no pressure, no timeline, no expectation of performance. Even the idea of trying to sleep can become a source of strain. The brain hears the word try and responds with effort, with assessment, with comparison, all of which activate the very systems that sleep requires to be quiet. This is why letting go is not a skill in the usual sense. It is not something we do. It is something that happens when we stop doing, when we stop trying, when we simply allow what is already present to unfold in its own way. That unfolding is not always linear. Some nights rest arrives quickly. Other nights it takes its time. There is no formula, no guaranteed pattern. But what remains constant is this: the body wants to rest. The mind wants to restore. The system is not working against you. It is simply responding to what it knows. And you can teach it something new. Gently. Through repetition, through softness, through presence. Presence is one of the most underappreciated qualities in the modern world. Not focused attention, not productivity, but simple, quiet being. The kind of presence that does not aim to achieve, that does not measure or judge, that simply exists alongside whatever is happening. In that presence, restlessness has room. It has air. It stops needing to signal so loudly. And eventually it stops signaling at all. This is the atmosphere we are creating here, a consistent rhythm, a voice that does not change, a pace that does not escalate. These are not distractions. They are invitations. Invitations for the nervous system to stop scanning, for the brain to stop anticipating, for the soul to stop bracing. And in the absence of new input, the system recalibrates. It lets go. Not because it was told to, but because it no longer needs to hold on, even now. If the thoughts are still circling, if the body is still shifting, that's okay. That is part of the unwinding, the gradual letting down of alertness. You don't have to feel sleepy to be resting. You don't have to be still to be softening. Every moment in this space moves the system closer to rest, even if you don't feel it yet, even if it's not immediate. It is happening quietly, without rush. And that's enough. Much of what we experience as restlessness is not the result of a single cause. It's an accumulation, a layering of thoughts, sensations, habits, and expectations. Some of those layers formed years ago. Others are shaped daily by our environments, by the pace of communication, the patterns of responsibility, the constant presence of input. The mind becomes trained to jump, to respond, to evaluate, to remember. It moves from one task to the next, rarely landing fully before the next demand arrives. And this pattern doesn't stop just because the lights go out. The momentum carries forward, into the quiet, into the dark, into the very space where we hope for stillness. But the mind doesn't unlearn motion instantly. It slows gradually like a river approaching a wider stretch of water. The current remains, but the pace softens. It needs space to do that. Not just physical space, but mental space. A setting where nothing new is expected, where thoughts can begin to stretch instead of spin, where the system doesn't need to perform but can simply drift. That drifting is part of the process. It is not failure. It is not delay. It is transition. During that transition, it's common to notice memories that hadn't surfaced all day, to remember a small moment, a look, a phrase, a decision. These are not interruptions. They are reflections. The mind, unburdened by constant input, begins to process what was set aside. Not everything needs to be understood. Some of it just wants to be felt and then let go. That movement, feel, and release is one of the nervous system's natural mechanisms. But it only works when space is provided, when the system isn't required to act on everything it notices. This space is not always easy to create. The modern world is designed for engagement, for interaction, for response. But the nervous system cannot stay in a high response state forever. It needs time in the opposite direction, time without urgency, time without measurement, time without feedback. This is what deep rest provides. A place where the input slows and the system recalibrates. Not all at once, but gradually, moment by moment. Even language affects this process. Words that imply goals, like fix, achieve, overcome, can signal to the brain that something is wrong, that effort is needed. But sleep is not something to achieve. It's something that happens. When we stop directing, when we stop pushing, when we stop expecting a particular outcome, that's when the system begins to feel what's really present. And often, what's present is fatigue. A quiet kind, not dramatic, just there, waiting to be noticed. That kind of fatigue doesn't always arrive with a yawn. It arrives with a softening, with the absence of tension in the hands, with the loosening of the jaw, with the fading interest in the next thought. The nervous system, sensing that nothing new is coming, begins to shift. This is what the body was built to do. It is wired for rhythm, for cycles, for rest and wake, alertness and release. And those rhythms are still available, even when they've been buried beneath layers of restlessness. Reconnection begins with consistency, with gentle repetition, with atmospheres that do not change, The brain finds safety in predictability. When the sounds are steady, the voice is calm, the pacing doesn't shift, the system receives a new kind of message. Nothing is required here. You can stop preparing, you can stop responding, you can stop waiting for the next thing, because the next thing isn't coming. This is all there is, and that's enough. Restlessness may still linger, not as a flaw, not as a sign of resistance, but simply because it takes time to settle. It has its own rhythm too, and sometimes it needs to be heard before it can be released. Not solved, just witnessed. It may return again and again in different forms, but each time it arrives with less urgency, less weight, until eventually it becomes background, like the fading echo of a bell, still present, but no longer commanding attention. That's the quiet shift we're aiming for, not the disappearance of restlessness, but its transformation from something that holds the mind in motion to something that drifts with it, gently, without pulling, and eventually without sound. Even now, if your mind is still active, that's okay. The shift doesn't need to be complete. It only needs to begin, and it has. Simply by being here, simply by choosing a space without demand, without urgency, without a clock, a space that flows, word by word, without building toward anything. This lack of destination is intentional. It removes pressure, and without pressure, the system finds its own way to rest. Some nights that journey is quick, other nights it takes longer. But the direction is the same, toward quiet, toward stillness, toward sleep that is not chased but allowed. A sleep that arrives not because we demanded it, but because we stopped asking. The inner world is rarely linear. Thoughts arise in patterns we don't fully understand. Memories surface without invitation. Emotions shift without reason. The mind moves like weather, sometimes clear, sometimes cloudy, sometimes still, sometimes full of movement, and often this movement increases in quiet. When the outer world slows down, the inner world becomes more noticeable. Restlessness is often the first thing we feel when we begin to pay attention. It rises in the absence of distraction. And that's not a flaw, it's a transition. Some people try to clear their mind at night. They imagine a blank slate, an empty room, a silent field. But the mind is not a room to be emptied. It is a field in motion. A system of interwoven signals shaped by biology and memory and time. Thoughts are not intrusions. They are activity. Natural, expected, inevitable. Especially at the edge of sleep, when control softens and association begins to drift. At this edge, the brain begins to reorganize. It lets go of structure. It stops holding tight to sequence. Thoughts become images. Images become sensation. Meaning becomes less important than rhythm. This transition is essential to rest. And restlessness can simply be a sign that the transition has begun. The brain letting go of form, but not yet ready to release the content. There's a period just before sleep where everything becomes loose. Not lost, not gone, just looser. The boundaries blur, time stretches, words repeat themselves in ways that make sense for a moment and then drift away. This space, though difficult to describe, is often where the deepest shifts occur. Not by thinking, not by doing, but by not resisting. The mind drops beneath itself, and rest follows. This is why gentleness matters so much. When we are kind to our thoughts, they settle. When we stop judging the mind for being awake, it begins to feel safe enough to fall asleep. Harshness activates the very systems we are trying to soothe. Effort awakens the parts of the brain that manage goals and outcomes. But gentleness has the opposite effect. It signals that there's nothing to do, that all is well even now, and that signal is what opens the door to rest. Some people fall asleep to stories, others to music, others to silence. But what they all share is this: a rhythm, a familiar, safe, undemanding pattern that tells the nervous system it can stop looking for what's next. This script, with its slow unfolding and steady voice, serves that purpose too. Not as something to learn, not as something to follow, but as something to drift beside. You don't have to listen closely. You don't have to hold on. This is not a path to be walked. It's a current to float in, a motion that does not move toward anything, but gently circles itself. Even the most persistent restlessness can soften in that kind of motion, because there's nothing to resist, nothing to figure out, no step to miss. Just a soft repetition of presence, words arriving, words fading, breath moving, thought slowing, sensation dimming, until even the sense of time begins to blur. And if you're still fully awake, that's fine too. There's no requirement here, no standard to meet. Sleep will come when it's ready. And in the meantime, this is still rest. Being here with yourself without needing to be different than you are. That is rest. That is enough. Eventually, the body follows the rhythm it's given. If that rhythm is fast and sharp and demanding, the body stays ready. If the rhythm is slow and even and safe, the body begins to mirror it. The pulse drops. The breath deepens. The muscles forget they were holding anything. This is not hypnosis, it's biology, a system designed to respond to the environment. And when the environment says nothing is needed, the body listens. This space is designed to say that, again and again, without words, without insistence, just through its presence, just by being here, always the same. A place where thoughts are allowed, restlessness is welcomed, and nothing is pushed away. So if your mind is still active, that's okay. Let it be. If your body still wants to move, let it move. If you're waiting for rest to arrive, stop waiting. Just be here. That's enough. Rest begins not when the noise disappears, but when it no longer demands your full attention. When the foreground becomes background. When the center loosens. When what once felt sharp becomes soft. That softening is already happening. There's something uniquely human about trying to understand our own restlessness. Animals don't seem to question their pacing or their stillness. They move when they need to. They pause when the signals allow. But humans live with stories, with meaning, with memory. And that means we often feel the need to explain what we feel, to categorize it, to assign it a reason, a cause, an endpoint, and when we can't, it becomes harder to let it go. The mind circles the sensation looking for logic, looking for a shape it can hold. But restlessness doesn't always give us that. Sometimes it's just presence, motion without story, echoes without source. This is part of why sleep can feel so elusive. It requires the mind to let go not only of its tasks, but of its need to name, to know, to solve. The pre-sleep state is one of surrender, not conclusion, and for a mind used to clarity, this can feel unnatural. The thought says, "What is this feeling?" The body says, "It's nothing to fix, just a signal passing through." And in that conversation, the soul waits, somewhere between attention and release. If you've ever felt like your restlessness makes you different, you're not alone. Many people experience this. They don't always speak about it. They may not have the words. But beneath the surface, they too lie awake while the world sleeps. Their minds move quietly while the room is still. And sometimes just knowing that you're not alone in this can begin to ease the tension. This sensation is not yours alone to carry. It is part of being aware, part of being sensitive, part of being alive. And the more we accept that, the less sharp it becomes, the more familiar it feels. Familiarity is not the same as comfort, but it can lead to comfort. What is known becomes even less threatening. What is expected becomes less intrusive. And eventually the body begins to relax, not because the restlessness is gone, but because it is no longer unfamiliar. It becomes part of the rhythm. One wave among many, rising, falling, softening. Some describe this as floating, not asleep, not fully awake, just present. With thoughts that pass like wind, with sensations that arise and then fade. The breath finds its own tempo, the body finds its own posture. The world narrows to something simple. A few words, a few sounds, a few breaths, and in that simplicity something shifts. There is no exact moment when sleep begins. We don't feel it arrive, we only notice it in hindsight. We realize the voice has stopped, the thoughts have scattered, the time has passed, and we were no longer here in the way we thought we were. This is the grace of sleep. It doesn't demand entry, it waits, it watches. And when the system is ready, it steps forward quietly, without introduction. That's why the best thing we can do is not to chase it, not to call it, but to stop calling anything, to let the mind release its grip on intention, to let the body stop preparing, to simply remain soft and open without pressure. Even the act of listening changes. In the beginning, we listen with attention. Later, we listen with openness. And finally, we listen without effort. The words become texture. The sentences become rhythm. Meaning becomes less important than movement. The voice is no longer followed. It is simply there. Like a tide that continues, even when you stop noticing its pull. And if you are still noticing, that is fine too. Some minds linger longer. Some systems take more time. That time is not wasted. It is part of the pattern. There is no need to rush it. Every moment in this space is movement toward rest, even the ones that feel like stillness. Your mind is allowed to move. Your body is allowed to be unsettled. You are allowed to be unfinished. There is nothing to complete here. No point to reach. No ending to hold. Just this breath, this sentence, this moment, and then the next. Many people associate rest with stillness, but not all rest is still. There is rest in rhythm, in repetition, in safe and predictable motion. The heartbeat is not still, yet it supports rest. The breath continues to rise and fall even in sleep. The nervous system does not stop. It changes state. It softens. It recalibrates. And in doing so, it begins to support the deeper cycles of recovery. This means that restlessness doesn't have to vanish for rest to begin. It only needs to shift. From active searching to passive allowing, from tightness to looseness, from effort to ease. We often assume rest must feel a certain way, calm, clear, silent. But many forms of rest begin with noise. The noise of thought, of sensation, of memory, of the day replaying itself. That noise is not disqualifying. It is not a sign that something is broken. It is part of the transition. The system does not go from full speed to silence in a single moment. It winds down. It checks. It reorients. And even while this is happening, recovery is already underway. This is important to understand because it removes the urgency. It tells us that we are not waiting for some magic switch to be flipped. We are already on the path simply by being here, by choosing this slow rhythm, by allowing words to drift without needing to hold them, by letting thoughts pass without following them. These small permissions accumulate. They shift the baseline. They prepare the ground for rest to arrive naturally when the conditions are right. The body speaks a language of safety. It listens for cues: darkness, warmth, consistency, slowness. These are some of the cues that signal it's time. And even if your conscious mind is still alert, your deeper systems may already be responding. The body knows how to rest. It does not need instruction, it needs space. Space without evaluation, space without performance, space that stays quiet, even if the mind does not. It's okay if you've been here before, lying down, waiting, hoping for sleep, feeling it stay just out of reach. It's okay if that happens again. That doesn't mean something is wrong. It means your system is still moving through the layers, still settling, still shifting from holding to letting go. And that process takes as long as it takes. Some nights are shorter, some are longer. But the path is the same, the signals still work, the body still listens. Even now, if your thoughts are looping, if your muscles are tight, if your attention keeps returning to the clock, or the idea that sleep isn't coming quickly enough, breathe gently around those thoughts. Not to stop them, but to give them room. Rest is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of urgency around thought. You don't need to chase silence, you only need to soften your hold on noise. In time, the noise fades. Not all at once, but slowly, like fog lifting. Not because the fog was forced to rise, but because the sun warmed the air beneath it. The environment changed, and the fog responded. The same is true here. The repetition of calm signals begins to change the atmosphere inside you. The space opens, and in that opening, rest begins. This script is not here to teach. It is not here to solve. It is here to create that atmosphere, to continue speaking gently in the background, to provide a shape for your thoughts to move around. Something predictable, something soft, something that does not ask for anything in return. You may drift in and out of focus, that's expected. You may lose the thread of the sentence, that's welcomed. The mind does not need to track every word. It can begin to let go. Not because it was told to, but because nothing more is needed. Nothing new is arriving. Nothing is changing. This stillness in pacing becomes a cue. The brain learns from it. The heart slows in response. The breath deepens, even if just slightly. These are not dramatic changes, but they matter. They mark the beginning of rest, even while the conscious mind continues to wander. And so if you are still wandering, that is fine. The path beneath you remains the same. No matter where the mind goes, the atmosphere stays steady. And in that steadiness, something inside you begins to trust the process. That's when rest begins to arrive, not all at once, but in pieces, in soft waves, in quiet spaces between thoughts. The sense of being nearly there but not quite can be one of the most familiar sensations for a restless soul. A kind of nearness to rest that never fully lands. The body may be still. The room may be quiet. The mind may even feel tired. But something hovers. A sliver of awareness, a flicker of thought. A subtle readiness that refuses to dissolve. This in-between space can feel like a holding pattern. And when it repeats night after night, it begins to feel like part of who you are. But even in this space, the nervous system is learning. It is listening. It is responding to your choices. And when you choose calm environments, when you return to steady rhythms, when you spend time in atmospheres that ask nothing of you, your body begins to remember something older, a slower pattern, one that wasn't shaped by deadlines or brightness or noise, but by nature, by cycles, by long, deep, repeating waves of effort and ease. These patterns still live inside you. They are not gone, only quieted, and when you make space for them, they return, slowly, like a language you haven't spoken in years. At first, the words come awkwardly, the phrases don't connect, but over time, the rhythm reappears, and rest becomes less of a goal and more of a re-entry into something familiar, something that never stopped being true. That's the hidden nature of rest. It doesn't need to be created, it only needs to be uncovered. It lives beneath the surface, waiting for noise to fade, waiting for pressure to soften, waiting for the system to believe once again that nothing is needed. This trust takes time, especially for people who have carried long seasons of vigilance, who have spent years tuned to others, watching for signals, preparing to respond. The brain adapts to that kind of life. It becomes good at it, alert, quick, responsive. But those same strengths make rest more distant, because the system no longer believes that nothing is coming. It stays ready just in case. And readiness is not a failure. It is care. It is capacity. But it must be balanced. And the balancing begins when the system is exposed to cues that are not asking for anything. Calm without agenda. Quiet without emptiness. Stillness without absence. That's the role of this space, not to instruct or repair or push, but to be present, with the same tone, the same pace, the same softness, again and again, until the system, on its own terms, begins to soften in response, not because it was told to, because it chose to. You may feel this shift as a slowing of thought, a loosening of attention, a sense that the next sentence is harder to follow, not because you're distracted, but because the brain has stopped needing to track. That's not loss, that's release. The same release that happens in the muscles before sleep, in the eyelids, in the jaw, in the space behind the eyes where alertness lives. These small shifts add up. Not everyone is noticeable, but together they move the whole system toward rest. Even if the mind is still moving, even if the restlessness is still there. Because rest is not a light switch, it is a dimmer, a series of slow, overlapping signals that, over time, lead to sleep. And if sleep hasn't arrived yet, that's okay. You are still in the process, you are still moving toward it. And the movement itself is part of what allows it to come. Let this space continue to hold you, not as a container, but as a rhythm, a background current that never changes. Even as your thoughts rise and fall, the rhythm stays. That's what makes it safe. That's what allows the nervous system to stop checking, to stop scanning, to stop preparing. And eventually, when enough of the system has received that message, something opens. Sleep steps forward, quietly without warning. You do not see it arrive. You only find yourself inside it. There are moments, even in deep rest, when awareness returns unexpectedly. A flicker of thought, a sense of the room, a stray memory rising without clear cause. This is normal. The brain does not descend into sleep in one direction only. It ebbs and flows, shifts between levels, sometimes returning to the surface for no reason at all. And when it does, it can bring with it the sense that something has restarted, that rest has been undone, but it hasn't. That's just the nature of drifting, of release, of the human mind in motion. We tend to think of rest as linear, but it isn't. It curls around itself. It steps forward and back. It pauses. It restarts. And through it all, the system continues to downshift. Even when it doesn't feel like progress, even when the thoughts seem louder than before, the process remains. The body continues to respond to the environment it's in. And if that environment is soft, slow, and safe, the system will eventually match it. That's the quiet power of repetition. It removes the need for novelty, for tracking, for expectation. And once the mind realizes that nothing new is arriving, it stops reaching forward. It begins to drift back into older rhythms, older comforts, the ones we were born with but have forgotten how to trust. And trust is the key. Rest cannot be forced. It must be allowed. The body rests when it trusts that it will not be needed. The mind rests when it trusts that no answer is required. The soul rests when it feels it has nothing left to hold. These states are not rare, but they are often unfamiliar. And becoming familiar with them takes time. Some people find that their restlessness comes not from fear or noise or tension, but from vigilance, a sense of duty, a feeling that something important might be missed, that if they don't stay just slightly awake, something could go wrong. And often this has roots in real experiences, moments where their alertness was necessary, where their attention made the difference. The body remembers those times, and it doesn't let go easily, not because it's stubborn, but because it cares. But over time, with new patterns, new environments, new rhythms, the body can learn to let go again, to stop standing guard when there's nothing to guard against, to stop holding a posture of readiness when nothing is coming. This is not a single decision. It is 1,000 small recalibrations, a gradual softening, a learning through experience that rest is not dangerous, that rest is not absence, that rest is a presence of its own kind. And in that presence, restlessness begins to lose its sharpness. It may still be there, but it no longer pulls so hard. It no longer insists on being the center. It becomes one sensation among many, and eventually it fades, not because it was silenced, but because it was heard, because it had space to move, because nothing was demanded of it. That's the pattern we're in now, the long, slow spiral towards sleep. One word at a time, one breath at a time. There is no rush, no clock, just the repetition of calm sound, the rhythm of voice, the absence of interruption. And if your mind drifts, that's good. If your attention fades, that's good. That means the thoughts are no longer gripping, that the system is beginning to let the content slide into the background. The meaning no longer matters. Only the motion, the slow rolling of sound and silence, of breath and space. Eventually, the restlessness will soften too, even if it returns tomorrow. Even if it never fully leaves, it will lose its sharpness, its edges will smooth, and you'll begin to find stillness not in its absence, but in its quiet companionship. A kind of peace that doesn't depend on perfection, a rest that doesn't need to be complete to be real. Sometimes the most powerful shift comes not from what we remove, but from what we stop resisting. Restlessness, when viewed without judgment, begins to change shape. It no longer feels like an intruder. It becomes part of the room, part of the rhythm, something that moves gently alongside breath and sound. It can still be noticed, but it no longer leads. It no longer defines the space. And in that shift, the system begins to loosen its grip. The cycle of urgency breaks. Nothing is being fought. Nothing is being fixed. And so the energy that was holding it in place begins to fade. The body, too, responds to this release. Subtle muscles you didn't know you were holding begin to soften. The small tensions behind the eyes, around the shoulders, and the hands start to drift away. They were never dramatic, just quiet forms of readiness, residual signals that the system might still be needed. But here, in this quiet rhythm, they begin to receive a different signal. One that says, not now, not here. You're done for today. And when that message lands, the shift is almost imperceptible. A longer exhale, a deeper sense of weight, a moment where the thought you were holding simply drifts off. These are the signs, not big, not loud, but unmistakable. The system is changing state, not by force, but by trust. Because nothing new is arriving. Nothing is demanding your attention. The voice continues, not to teach, not to persuade, but to keep the rhythm going. A slow background presence, predictable, calm, without goal. And in the absence of goal, rest becomes possible, because there is no expectation to fail, no pressure to meet, just softness, just breath, just the quiet presence of words that don't need to be held. You can miss them, you can forget them, they will continue. That's the point. For a restless soul, this can feel unfamiliar. So much of life is built around action, around tracking, around remembering what was said, but here, none of that is needed. You are allowed to let go of every piece, knowing that the rhythm remains, that the thread doesn't need to be followed. Because there is no destination, only repetition, only return. The nervous system learns from this. It begins to mirror what it senses. If the pace remains even, the mind stops expecting interruption. If the tone remains steady, the thoughts stop chasing the next shift. And in that consistency, the body finds its own cues. Cues that say you can drop now. Not all at once, but a little more. Then a little more again. Even if thoughts still come, they arrive more softly. They pass through instead of circling. They touch the edges without staying. And the space between them begins to grow. Not in silence, but in softness. In space that doesn't require filling. This is the texture of rest. Not emptiness, not stillness, but openness. The kind that welcomes whatever appears without needing to respond. And in that openness, the deepest systems begin their work. Repair, rebalance, memory sorting, emotional integration. These are the quiet processes of night. The invisible motions that carry us toward restoration. They don't require our awareness. In fact, they function best without it. Which is why the mind, once allowed to release its grip, begins to hand things over. It steps back. Not out of exhaustion, but out of trust. Because it senses that the environment no longer needs it to lead. That's what you're doing now, allowing the mind to feel that shift. Not through silence, but through repetition, through predictability, through a space where nothing will change unexpectedly. That is what a restless soul needs more than anything. Consistency. A signal that the world will stay still long enough for it to rest. That no new demands will appear. That this moment can be trusted. And here, in this rhythm, that trust can grow. Slowly, gently, without urgency. The idea of safety is often misunderstood. We tend to think of it as the absence of danger. But for the nervous system, safety is more than that. It is the presence of reliability, predictability, familiar cues that say, you've been here before and nothing bad happened. You can stop scanning. You can stop preparing. You can stop holding the invisible weight you carry. And this kind of safety is what makes rest possible. Not through logic, but through experience, through repetition, through time spent in spaces where nothing is asked of you, where you are not expected to perform, not even to improve, just to be. That's why rest can feel difficult after seasons of strain. If the body has learned to stay alert, it doesn't simply forget. Even when the strain is over, the system may still echo its shape. The mind may still check. The heart may still brace. The muscles may still prepare. This is not resistance. This is memory, a system doing exactly what it learned to do. And this memory fades, not by being erased, but by being slowly overwritten, rewritten by new experiences, quiet ones, repeating ones, nights where nothing is required, where stillness is safe again. For a restless soul, this relearning begins with permission. The permission to stop being useful, to stop managing, to stop interpreting everything. The nervous system must be shown again and again that stillness does not demand an explanation, that you are allowed to rest even if nothing is solved, even if the thoughts continue, even if the past is still there, unprocessed. That rest is not a reward for completion. It is a right, one that belongs to you by nature. And this truth softens things. It removes the quiet belief that rest must be earned, that something more must be done first, that until everything feels peaceful, sleep is not deserved. But peace does not always precede rest. Sometimes rest comes first, and peace arrives later, through the calm it brings. One leads to the other. Slowly, quietly. You might feel, even now, that something in you is still slightly active, still checking the words, still holding a little tighter than it needs to. That's okay, it doesn't have to stop all at once. Softening happens in layers. The first layer is attention, the second is permission, and the third is trust. Trust that even if nothing changes right now, this moment is still enough. You do not have to stop thinking to rest. You do not have to stop feeling. You do not have to understand why your mind keeps moving. All you need is to stop asking it to change. The system hears that differently. When the demands stop, the readiness begins to dissolve. Slowly, quietly. As if a door inside the body has been unlocked, and something begins to exhale for the first time in a long while. This is not always dramatic. Most often it's subtle. You may notice a single breath that feels easier than the one before it. A pause between thoughts that lasts a moment longer. A weight in your body that shifts just slightly. These are signs, small ones, but real. The system is recalibrating even now. There is no hurry. The voice will stay here. The rhythm will not change. And if your mind drifts, if your awareness fades in and out, that's part of it. That's what this space is built for. A place where presence and absence are equally welcome. Where alertness fades gently without instruction. Where thoughts dissolve not through effort but through disinterest. They simply stop gripping and eventually they stop returning. That may be happening already. You may have noticed fewer edges, fewer corners, fewer reasons to hold on. You may have forgotten the last sentence. That's a sign. The system is doing what it knows how to do once the conditions are right. And if it takes a while longer, that's fine too. The body is not behind. The mind is not failing. This process is not timed. It unfolds at the pace your system needs. And that pace is perfect. There is a kind of quiet that only arrives when nothing is expected. A stillness that appears not when everything stops, but when nothing new begins. It's not about removing every sound or silencing every thought. It's about being with what remains after effort fades. This is the quiet that allows the nervous system to begin its slow descent into rest. And it doesn't happen on command. It happens through exposure, through repetition, through familiarity with environments that don't change and don't ask. This is why calm narration can support sleep, not because of its content, but because of its shape, its rhythm, its refusal to build, to escalate, to arrive somewhere. The words continue, but nothing important is said. There is no arc, no problem, no resolution, just slow, steady motion. And the nervous system, encountering that, it mirrors it. It stops tracking. It stops preparing for the next thing. Because the next thing is the same as the last. And that sameness is not boring, it's safe. For a restless soul, sameness is a form of medicine. Life is often full of contrast. Noise after silence. Change after stillness. Action after pause. The nervous system learns to scan for these shifts, to prepare for what might come. But when nothing comes and nothing changes and the tone remains soft and steady, the system starts to trust again. It stops standing guard. Not immediately, but gradually, like a gate that opens an inch at a time. You may feel this in your breathing, not as something you do, but as something that begins to shift on its own. You notice the breath is slower now, or deeper, or that you're no longer aware of it most of the time. That is rest in motion. Not a destination reached, but a tension released. One that you may not have realized you were carrying. Sometimes restlessness hides in our smallest habits, a clenched toe, a hand that never quite opens, a pattern of scanning the room, even in the dark. These aren't flaws, they're adaptations. The body learned to do them in response to something, and now in a different environment, it slowly learns that they're no longer necessary. This is the repatterning of rest, the unlearning of vigilance, the slow return to softness. And it's okay if this process feels unfamiliar. Most people are used to either full alertness or full sleep, but the space in between is rich. It's the threshold, the place where rest begins, where control fades, where the mind begins to trust that it doesn't need to lead. You may be drifting in and out of that space now. Words come in, then disappear. Thoughts flicker and fade. Time stretches. You lose track of where you are in the script. That's a sign. It means the part of you that watches, the part that stays ahead, is resting. Even if you don't feel fully asleep, something inside has stepped back. And that stepping back is the beginning. It creates room for rest to grow, not like a switch, but like a shadow lengthening across a quiet floor. It expands gradually until it covers everything. And you don't need to help it. You don't need to understand it. You only need to let it arrive in its own time. Even now, like the voice continues, the rhythm continues, and if you're not listening anymore, that's perfect. This is not a performance. It's a background presence, something that stays the same so you don't have to. You can drift, you can forget, you can pause and return or never return at all. The script will continue, the sound will remain, and eventually, without ever trying, you'll realize that rest has already begun. Not because something ended, but because nothing more was needed. There is a kind of rest that doesn't feel like rest at first. It isn't marked by sudden stillness or silence. It's quieter than that, more subtle. It shows itself in the way you stop holding on to thoughts so tightly, in the way your body stops shifting, even if only for a moment, in the way your mind stops needing to complete every idea it starts. That kind of rest often appears when you're no longer watching for it, when the effort to sleep dissolves, when the thoughts are allowed to remain unfinished. The brain is not a machine to be turned off. It's a landscape. And some landscapes stay active long after the sun goes down. The winds move, the shadows stretch. The memory of the day lingers in the air. You don't need to quiet this landscape. You only need to walk through it slowly, without trying to change it, without trying to name everything you see. Just move with it. Let it be what it is. And let yourself be what you are, resting, even if not yet asleep. This kind of rest is important. It tells the nervous system that it doesn't need to work so hard, that it can begin to trust the environment, that it can begin to loosen its grip. Sometimes this loosening is felt in your hands, in your face, in the center of your chest. Other times, it's only felt in the way your attention softens. You stop noticing what time it is. You stop wondering what's next. You stop needing to keep track. That's how the system knows it's safe to rest. Not because everything is quiet, but because nothing is required. The mind, no longer needed to organize or protect, begins to step back. The body, no longer asked to carry or anticipate, begins to melt into its own rhythm. And the soul, no longer bound to vigilance, begins to settle into presence. Sometimes this happens without us knowing. We only notice that we've stopped noticing. The thoughts are softer, the body is heavier, the world has grown quieter, even though the voice continues. This is not a moment you need to catch. It is not a goal. It is simply something that happens when there is enough repetition, enough softness, and enough space. This space remains steady. The voice does not rise. The rhythm does not change. It continues, not to hold your attention, but to give your attention something safe to drift across, like water gliding beneath a boat. No direction, no destination, just motion, just repetition. And even now, if your thoughts are still active, that's okay. They belong here too. They're part of the softening, part of what gets carried downstream. No thought has to be removed. Just let it pass. Let it fade. Let it return if it wants. You don't need to guide it. You don't need to resist it. You only need to remain beside it, without effort. That's how the system learns to rest. Not through control, but through the absence of control, through the presence of consistency, a voice that does not challenge, a space that does not shift, a rhythm that never asks for anything in return. This rhythm will continue whether you follow it or not. It will continue as your thoughts drift, as your body softens, as your breath slows, as the world narrows into something quieter than thought. Sleep may come gradually. It may come without you noticing. It may come long after this sentence ends. That doesn't matter, because rest has already begun. Somewhere between thought and silence, between awareness and sleep, there is a quiet middle place. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require attention. It simply appears when the system has slowed enough to notice that nothing is pulling anymore, that the effort to understand has faded, that the need to monitor has softened. This is the place where rest is not something you try for. It's something you notice you're already inside. You may already be close. The words may be harder to follow now. The rhythm may feel less like information and more like a hum in the background. That's good. That means your focus is loosening, that the grip around attention has begun to dissolve. You don't need to help this process. In fact, helping would interrupt it. Your only task is no task at all. This lack of task is not emptiness. It is spaciousness, a place where nothing needs to happen, and yet things begin to change. The nervous system slows. The mind wanders. The muscles release their tension one layer at a time, and in the absence of pressure, the system remembers how to settle. Even restlessness becomes part of the softening. It no longer feels like resistance. It simply becomes one more sensation in the room, present but not loud, moving but not demanding. You can let it be there, and it will fade on its own. Not because you silenced it, because it no longer needs to be heard. The same is true for thoughts. They may continue to arise. They may continue to loop. But without your attention, they begin to float, to blur, to lose their sharpness. They stop forming complete sentences. They stop asking for answers. They pass like mist, without edge, without urgency. Even now, the script continues. The voice remains steady, not because it needs to be heard, but because its presence creates rhythm, a repetition that the system can mirror. And once mirrored, that rhythm becomes internal. You begin to carry it, not by holding it, but by becoming part of it. Your breath may already be slower, your limbs heavier. You may feel a slight distance from your own thoughts, like they belong to someone else. This is part of the shift. The mind releasing its position at the center, letting other systems take over, systems that do not need language, that do not need logic, that only need stillness and time. And time is not measured here. There's no clock in this space, no schedule, no endpoint. Only continuation, only motion that never needs to arrive. That's what makes this space restful, the way it allows things to happen without needing them to. You might be in that space already, or you might still be circling it. It doesn't matter. Both positions are valid. Both are restful in their own way. The difference between wake and sleep is often smaller than we think. A single breath, a single pause, a single sentence you don't remember hearing. And when that happens, when awareness slips below the surface, there is no signal, no announcement, just a gentle disappearance, like a light that fades without ever turning off. Even the act of noticing that you are still awake can be gentle. It doesn't need to come with frustration or disappointment. It can simply be a quiet observation, like noticing a leaf hasn't fallen yet. It will, when the wind is right, when the rhythm allows. Sleep is like that. It doesn't arrive just because you ask. It arrives when the conditions support it, and one of the most powerful conditions is the absence of resistance. That's why this rhythm doesn't change, why the voice stays slow and the tone stays even. It gives your system the message it needs. There is nothing more to do. No shift is coming. No new information will arrive. This sameness is not boring. It's comforting. It tells your mind it can stop bracing, that it will not be asked to pivot or respond, that everything it needs is already here and always has been. You may feel this message landing slowly, like warmth spreading through the muscles, or like fog moving in, gently replacing clarity with softness. That's what happens when the body receives enough consistent cues. It stops asking questions. It stops waiting for the next task. And in the space left behind, rest begins to grow. This rest is not dramatic. It does not rush in. It appears in the in-between spaces, in the way your thoughts stop insisting, in the way you forget what you were trying to remember, in the way your body shifts without you realizing it. These moments mark the transition more clearly than any decision could. They are the signs that your system is doing what it knows how to do. Some nights, this transition is smooth. Other nights, it takes longer. There is no pattern that must be followed, only rhythms that unfold, and all of them are valid. There is nothing wrong with your rest if it doesn't look like someone else's. Your system is unique. It moves the way it needs to move, and rest, for you, may begin here, in this very moment, without warning, or it may not. And that's also fine. The nervous system is not obedient to willpower. It responds to consistency, to calm, to lack of demand. And even now, this consistency continues. The words do not change. The tone does not ask for attention. This is not a space to learn. It is a space to be. And in that being, something deep inside begins to relax. Maybe it's the space behind your eyes. Maybe it's the chest. Maybe it's the parts of you that have stayed tense without realizing. Whatever it is, it no longer feels the need to hold so tightly. It releases, even just a little. And in that small release, rest arrives. You may not remember the moment it happens. You're not supposed to. Sleep is not a performance. It is not a ceremony. It is not a prize. It is a natural state the body returns to when it no longer needs to stay awake. When the night gives enough signals. When the rhythm is slow enough, long enough, steady enough. That's what this space offers. And it will continue to offer it, sentence by sentence, until something inside you has heard it enough times to believe it. There is nothing else to do. There never was. It may seem strange, but some of the most restful states begin with mild awareness. You're not fully asleep, but you're not fully awake either. You can still hear the words, but they pass through without catching. You may even find yourself returning to the same sentence more than once. Not because it matters, but because your mind has begun to forget what just passed. This is not a failure of attention. This is a sign that attention has begun to rest. Rest is not always marked by stillness. Sometimes it is marked by neutrality, by the absence of effort, by the soft, steady passage of time where nothing urgent is happening and nothing new needs to begin. You may notice that your breathing has found a slower rhythm, that your limbs feel farther from you, that your mind no longer tracks each phrase, but instead floats somewhere nearby, content to let the words continue without it. This is exactly how rest begins, not in a dramatic shift, but in a slow erosion of edges, a gentle forgetting of where you end and quiet begins. It's a dissolving, a slow one, and it's already underway. You may still be thinking, but less often. You may still be aware of your body, but with less tension. You may still be watching your thoughts, but without needing to hold them. These are the spaces between alertness and sleep, and you are allowed to spend time here. You don't need to rush through them. These thresholds matter. They soften the system. They ease the mind. They carry you forward, one layer at a time. You may feel like you're resting more deeply than you expected, even if sleep hasn't fully come yet. That's valid. Rest is not measured in whether you're asleep. It's measured in how little effort remains. And right now, effort may be close to zero. You don't have to keep track of anything. You don't need to notice what's happening. You only need to remain present gently as the sound continues. And it will continue. Because that's what helps. The sameness, the quiet repetition, the steady rhythm of voice that doesn't try to teach or convince or guide, only to be, only to remain. Like a soft current beneath you, allowing your system to rest without needing to fall. Falling asleep is not something you do. It is something that happens to you when nothing else is required. And when you are in a space like this, with a pace like this, your body knows. It listens, it learns, and eventually it lets go. And even if tonight is slower than usual, even if your thoughts return more often than you expected, this space holds all of that. There is room here. Room for awareness, room for thought, room for quiet, room for sleep. You don't need to choose, you can simply float. The system will decide on its own when it's ready, without any signal, without any help. And when that moment comes, it won't need to be noticed. It will simply happen. The voice will continue. But you will no longer be here with it. You'll be elsewhere, inside that deeper rhythm, the one that's already starting to rise beneath the surface. Not every night looks the same. Some nights, sleep comes easily, like stepping into a familiar room. Other nights, the door feels a little farther away. The thoughts move a little faster. The restlessness sits a little closer. But the process remains the same. The body still responds to calm. The nervous system still listens for safety. The mind still looks for repetition, for rhythm, for signs that it can let go. Even on the nights that feel different, the deeper systems remain unchanged. What matters is not how quickly rest arrives, but whether the space for it has been created, and right now, you are in that space. Nothing new is coming. Nothing is expected of you. The voice stays steady, the pace does not change. There is no urgency here, no story to follow, no solution to reach, just presence, just quiet motion, just enough to carry you further away from alertness and deeper into the soft middle between awareness and sleep. That middle space is not a mistake. It is not a delay. It is part of the journey. The breath slows here. The thoughts stretch out. The world becomes quieter, not because the outside has changed, but because the mind has begun to turn inward, towards something slower, something older, something still. Even if you feel your attention return now and then, even if your thoughts briefly pull you back, the process is not lost. This rhythm continues without your effort. The sound continues even if you forget to listen. The rest continues even if your thoughts return. And every time you drift, and every time you come back, the nervous system becomes more familiar with this pattern, less guarded, more ready to release. You are not doing anything wrong by being awake. Wakefulness is not a failure. It is simply a moment that hasn't passed yet, a space that still holds motion. That motion is not in the way, it is part of the softening, part of how you begin to land, and soon it will slow too, just as all systems do when there is nothing left for them to respond to. This script will not wake you. It does not shift direction. It does not build toward meaning. It moves in slow circles, each sentence folding gently into the next. This lack of shape is intentional. It removes the need to follow. It removes the need to stay. You are allowed to drift, to forget, to step away. There is no end to reach, no final line to hold, just an open field of sound. And beyond that, sleep. Not waiting for you, but quietly unfolding around you like fog that doesn't ask to be seen. You may have already stepped into it without noticing. You may be standing at its edge. It makes no difference because either way, the stillness has begun. The tension has loosened. The thoughts have lost their edges. And soon, if not already, you will be gone too. Not gone in absence, gone in rest, in softness, in the deep, slow rhythms of a system that has stopped needing to guard itself. Sometimes the deepest part of rest comes when you no longer expect it. When you've stopped hoping for it, stopped waiting for it, stopped listening for signs. In that absence of trying, something finally opens. And sleep, no longer resisted or watched for, is free to arrive in its own quiet way. This isn't something to force. It's something that happens when there's nothing left for it to push against. Like mist entering an open room, it arrives because the space is there. This is what these long, slow stretches of narration are meant for, not to distract, not to guide, not even to explain, just to remain, just to offer a gentle shape that your mind can drift across without being caught. There is no weight in these words, no conclusion to hold on to, and because of that, your attention begins to float. Not forward, not backward, just weightless, somewhere between waking and sleep. You may feel that now. The slow erosion of mental edges, the soft hum behind your thoughts growing louder than the thoughts themselves, or perhaps the body growing heavier, denser, as if the ground is pulling it closer. These are signs of release, not performed, not practiced, just allowed. Even the thoughts that remain are softer now, less structured. They arrive in fragments, in images, in sensations. They no longer demand to be followed. They pass like leaves across water, visible but untouched. And if one thought lingers longer than the others, that's fine. It will pass too. Nothing stays long in this rhythm. Everything here moves gently, slowly, without effort. That includes you. You are part of this rhythm now, whether your eyes are open or closed, whether your thoughts are still moving or already gone, whether you hear these words clearly or only faintly. You are inside the process, and the process requires nothing from you. No correction, no alignment, no stillness you must force. You do not have to perfect this. You do not have to wait for a moment when it feels right. It already is. The nervous system has already heard what it needs. The repetition, the absence of demand, the presence of calm. These are the cues it listens to most deeply, and this space will continue to offer them. As long as you are here, or even after you're gone into sleep, the voice will stay soft. The rhythm will not shift. The flow will remain steady. This is not for your attention, it is for your system. It is the background hum of rest, and it continues whether or not you notice it. At some point, you may forget the sound altogether. You may drift so far that not even a trace of the words remains. That is welcome, that is expected. And even if you return briefly, even if you surface for a few moments of awareness, the current will carry you again. There is nothing you can do wrong in this space. There's no right way to rest. Only this moment and the next, and the one after that, until you are no longer counting them, until time no longer applies. There is a kind of rest that feels like being held without pressure. Nothing presses against you. Nothing pulls. It's the feeling of not needing to answer anything, not even your own thoughts, just letting them arrive and dissolve like sound absorbed by distance. Even the voice here, continuing at its usual pace, may already feel farther away. That distance is a sign, not of disconnection, but of descent, a slow, steady shift into quieter layers of awareness. Your body knows these layers. It has moved through them many times before. Not always consciously, but always willingly. When given the chance, when surrounded by cues that say you are safe now, you are done for today, there is nothing more to guard, nothing more to hold. Just wait, just breath. Just the rhythm of a system that has been allowed to stop. This permission is powerful, not because it grants anything new, but because it removes the need for vigilance. You do not have to monitor this process. You do not have to stay present. You are allowed to disappear, to become smaller than thought, to become part of the background. The part of you that remains aware of sound will fade on its own. No action is needed. Even if you are still thinking, you may notice that the thoughts are thinner now, that they move through you without friction, without story, without pull. This is what happens when thought no longer meets resistance. It keeps going, but it gets quieter, slower, lighter, until even the echo of it vanishes, and then only body remains. Breathing, sinking, drifting. It doesn't need your input anymore. Sleep is a function, not a command, a shift in systems, not a shift in effort, and it's already happening. You may not feel it, you don't need to. It's not a moment, it's a slope, and you're already moving down it. The voice continues, but only as a signal, only as a pattern. It doesn't carry meaning anymore. It doesn't require understanding. Its role now is to remain unchanged, so your attention can stop reaching. And when attention stops reaching, the system stops responding. That's when sleep becomes possible. Not through silence, but through repetition. Through the lack of surprise, through the presence of something so steady your mind forgets it's there. You may have forgotten where we began. You may not remember how long this has been playing. You may not even know which sentence you're in. That's good. That means the system is untethering. That time has become soft. That space has become abstract. That self has become unimportant. And soon even those small markers will dissolve. And you'll be left only with breath and stillness and something deeper than thought, something that holds you without needing to be known. You may still be aware, but only lightly, like hearing through a wall, like dreaming with your eyes half open. There's no sharpness left in the sound, no edge in the rhythm, only continuity. And that continuity does its work slowly, quietly. It lets your attention rest by giving it nothing urgent to do, no choice to make, no meaning to hold, just the soft weight of words passing by. This is how systems slow, not through effort, but through exposure. Repeated signals, familiar patterns, spaces where nothing unexpected happens. That's what tells the brain it's okay to drop below the surface now, that it's safe to drift, that whatever was needed has already happened, and that what remains is only presence, only stillness, only breath. Sometimes the breath is the only thing left to notice, and then even that slips away. Fade. The body breathes on its own. The system slows without permission. Sleep is not a switch, it is a tide. And tides move gradually. You don't need to feel it rising, you only need to let it move beneath you. Even now, even if your thoughts return, even if awareness flickers, the pull downward continues. It is gentle but constant. You're being carried. And even if you do nothing, the current continues to move. You may have noticed your thoughts taking on a dreamlike texture, less logic, more image, less language, more sensation. This is what happens near the edges of sleep. Thought begins to unshape, to unbind, to become something fluid, something that doesn't need to be understood. You don't need to follow it, just let it happen. It will shift again soon. There's nothing more to hold. No reason to stay alert. Even the act of listening has softened. The voice is here, but it no longer asks for your ears. It simply stays, so that you don't have to. And eventually you won't. Eventually you will drift. If not already, if not now, then soon. And even if you don't notice, even if you wake and wonder when it happened, the process will have done its work. Sleep may not feel like a door you walk through. It may feel more like a horizon fading or a sky dimming, or a path that simply disappears behind you. There is no need to reach it. You are already inside it. This space was built to hold you, not to lead you. And the holding continues whether or not you're aware of it. You are resting now, whether fully asleep or not, whether aware or not, whether hearing these words or simply sensing their echo. Rest is not a moment. It's a direction. And you've been moving in that direction the entire time. Good night. Sleep well.